Souvenir Programs here. Episode number, I have no idea. But I can tell you what episode number it is of Held by Legends, Signed by Heroes. Episode number 90. Very fitting because the man of the moment is 91. Today's show is about a pitcher many will know because he pitched in 2 MLB All-Star games and 2 World Series. Not one of my usual shows about a minor league ball player and his struggles going through the farm systems. Although this player would have those struggles, he also had a physical disadvantage. His nickname? Bud, is what his friends call him and how he signs his autograph. But when his mom calls him, she calls Buddy. See the cowboy on the horse? This 6'1", 185-pound Southern California boy is a southpaw pitcher whose full name is Leavitt Leo Daley and was named after his father, Leavitt. His middle name, Leo, comes from Saint Leo, a name his mother picked, and she also chose his nickname, Buddy, because as an only child, she always wanted a baby like her cousin, Buddy Walker. So I guess Mrs. Daley was pretty happy that her son is listed in a spring training program as Buddy Leo Daley. And at some point in his life, Bud legally changed his name to Buddy. When? I don't know. He also grew up an only child, but later in life, after marriage, Bud and his wife would raise 4 kids, and he is now surrounded by generations of children. As a youngster, he didn't take a real interest in baseball till high school, and didn't join the team till his junior year, and was a senior the first time he pitched, losing only 1 game, hitting .450. You can always tell a lefty's signature. It's going down. Instead of righties, they write, it goes up. So he wasn't really into baseball, only played a couple years in high school, and this is way before the major leagues came to the West Coast. And Bud said he could only name 4 major league teams when he got out of high school, saying that he wanted to make it in the Pacific Coast League. And so here's a prime example of how kids can influence your decision making. He was still a teenager when he signed with Cleveland Indians before the start of the 1951 season, saying he chose them over all the other big league offers for the simple reason he used to babysit Bob Lemon's kids. Bud Daley has a wide variety of collectibles besides all of his cards. He has coins, stamps, picture packs, exhibits, everything from bazooka tri-panels and O-Pee-Chee tattoos to his Cuban League card and a couple of Venezuelan tops. Every item lists his wrong birth date, and only 2 list him as Buddy. Bud Daley would play for a variety of teams during his first few years with the Indians organization, starting off on the West Coast in Bakersfield, and worked his way east, playing in Cedar Rapids, Reading, and Indianapolis. All 4 of those teams were called the Indians. It was in 1954 Bud would finally play for a team not called the Indians, when on the West Coast in the PCL, pitching AAA ball for the Sacramento Solons, where he'd win 18 games that season. Dad saw him play a few times in 1955 and has 3 of his autographs. A lefty junk ball pitcher who threw curves of 2 different speeds. One was his roundhouse. He had a great knuckleball in his arsenal and was known to throw a spitball. Bud said to throw a spitter, he'd make his thumb and fingers moist, hold the ball by the white part, and then squeeze it like a watermelon seed as he threw it, keeping the ball from spinning. Bud Daley made his MLB pitching debut on the last game of the 1955 season for Cleveland, getting his first MLB start in the process, and was at the 1956 Indians spring training camp in Scottsdale. So was my dad. He was optioned to the Indianapolis Indians on the 4th of July, 1956, and would go 11-1 with that club, which led Cleveland to call him back up. And this is when Bud would get his first big league win. He started the 1957 going 3-0 with Cleveland's AAA affiliate, the San Diego Padres, and again he would get called back up, but this time had a poor showing and was traded in March of '58, along with 2 players to the Baltimore Orioles for Larry Doby and Don Ferrarossi. A couple of weeks later, the Orioles would trade Bud to the Kansas City Athletics. Orioles manager Paul Richards told Bud, "We already have 6 lefties, and they all have more experience than you." His first season with Kansas City in '58, Bud came out of the bullpen, but the second season he became their ace, going 16-13, and was selected to the 1959 All-Star Game by AL manager Casey Stengel. That's despite being sidelined in July with an infected knee he hurt while sliding. Bud Daley pitched in the first of the two 1959 All-Star games that season, coming in for Whitey Ford in the 8th inning with Sherm Lawler catching. Bud said, "He called a knuckleball, I threw it. Ernie Banks missed. So Sherm called for it again, I threw it again. Another strike," unquote. What do you think Sherm calls for in front of 35,000 plus at Forbes Field? Yep, another knuckleball. Strike 3, next. Oh, it's Orlando Cepeda. I wonder what Ernie Banks said to Orlando on his way back to the dugout. Now, just what do you think catcher Sherm Lawler calls for Bud Daley to throw to Orlando Cepeda? Yep, another knuckleball, followed by a couple more. One Cepeda popped up. Bud Daley sat down back to back, two future Hall of Famers, all on flutterballs. In 1960, Bud was picked to be in the All-Star Game for the second season in a row, this time tapped by AL manager Al Lopez, who gave Bud a choice. He could either pitch in the final inning of the first game in front of the hometown fans in Kansas City at Municipal Stadium, or be the starter in the second game 2 days later at Yankee Stadium. Bud said he didn't blink and chose to be the closer in KC. In Bud Daley's words, "That was one of the biggest thrills I ever had. I came in to pitch the last inning. The bullpen was in dead center field. I opened up the gate and started walking in. From the time I opened up the gate until the time I got to the mound, I had a standing ovation the whole way." First up to the plate, Bud would face Veda Pinson, who goes down swinging on 3 pitches. Next up is Orlando Cepeda, who Bud sat down in the last year's All-Star Game. In this game, Cepeda strikes out, and he too goes down swinging. Bud walks Ken Boyer and gets Roberto Clemente to line out to left field, thus completing Bud Daley's 1960 All-Star inning in Kansas City. Years later, Bud said he considered it a bigger deal than being the winning pitcher of a closeout Game 5 win in the World Series. He would have 16 wins again in 1960, placing him third in the AL, his last full season with A's. And after being their number 1 pitcher on the staff and an MLB All-Star 2 years in a row, the A's relegated Bud to the bullpen for 1961, which did not suit his style and he wasn't effective. But it was probably his performances at those 2 All-Star games which put Bud in the right place at the right time and left an impression with Yankees manager Casey Stengel, because in June of 1961, Bud was traded to the New York Yankees. It was the infamous GM Frank Lane who traded Bud to the A's and then later to the Yankees, saying it was the worst trade he ever made. Trader Frank, as he was called, was a GM notorious for making deals at the drop of a hat and is the one who traded Bud the first time from Cleveland to Baltimore. Turns out, as soon as Bud heard the A's hired Frank Lane as their GM, Bud put his house up for sale. And sure enough, Trader Frank traded him to the Yankees. The story goes, the A's were in Minnesota for a series against the Twins while the trade was being negotiated. Bud was informed of the trade by the A's infielder, Lou Klimchok, who picked up the phone to make a call and quickly realized he was listening to a personal conversation between A's new owner, Charlie Finley, and Yankees GM, Roy Hamey. Lou listened to the whole conversation and then went over and told Bud the news that he was going to be a New York Yankee. So halfway through the 1961 season, Bud will now be donning the Yankee pinstripes. And even though he didn't have double-digit wins that season like most of the Yankee pitching crew, he did make a difference by winning the pennant-clinching game. And in the 1961 World Series, he came in Game 5, working the final 7 innings in long relief for Yanks starter Ralph Terry. Bud Daley would win that game and close out that World Series over the Cincinnati Reds. Bud would also pitch in the 1962 World Series against the Giants in San Francisco, entering the game in the 8th inning of Game 2. Over the course of the 1961 and 1962 championship seasons, Bud Daley was 15-14 for New York, mostly as a starter, and allowed no runs in 8 innings of World Series appearances. Bud said his favorite Yankee catcher to work with was Elston Howard because they thought alike and didn't like working with Yogi Berra too much because Yogi would never let Bud shake him off. The plan for 1963 was for Buddy Daley to come out of the bullpen, but an arm injury sidelined him for the rest of the season. He pitched a little in 1964 before being sent down to AAA Richmond, getting one more call-up in July and got a win versus Detroit. But when the season was over, the Yankees traded Bud to Cleveland, the club he started out with. He would attend the Indians' 1965 spring training camp only to be released, and that was his last look at the big show. Bud Daley had a nice career on the mound, though cut short by injury, and was done at the age of 31 and at the age of 32 out of the game. A 14-year pro with 10 of those in the majors, appearing in 248 games with an MLB record of 60-64. His relatively short time in the minors had him pitching a lot, making 216 appearances with 82 wins and only 57 losses. A couple of stories on my way out and some insight into the man who didn't start playing baseball till halfway through high school. The first story is a great MLB All-Star moment for pitcher Bud Daley. And the second story involves the doctor who delivered him on his birthday. So, between the A's and the Royals, they've been playing Major League Baseball in Kansas City for almost 70 years, and in that time, there's only been 2 pitchers that struck out at least half the batters they faced in an All-Star game. Royal Zach Greinke fanned 2 of 3 in the 2009 game. The other to do it, the man of the moment, Kansas City A's Leo Bud Daley. In his 2 All-Star affairs, 1959 and 1960, Bud struck out 3 of the 6 batters he faced, and because those are All-Star games, you know there are going to be some big names he sat down, and they were. 3 are in the Hall of Fame. Bud would be injured by the doctor on October 7th, 1932, during birth, when the forceps used pinched a nerve in the tiny newborn's arm, causing paralysis. Buddy is what is called an instrument baby. Though paralysis was not permanent, for the first 6 months of his life, the tiny arm didn't really move. Not an ideal way to start for your mom. Little newborn Buddy must have looked pretty misshapen and not moving like a normal baby for the first few months. And his poor mother, who was so distraught when she saw what the doctor did to her son that later on she would say, "No one wanted a baby more than I did, but little Buddy was so crippled I didn't want him to live." His right arm is 1 inch shorter than his left, and he is unable to fully straighten it out and has always had a hard time raising it to run a comb through his hair, saying, "It never had bothered me, other than a few awkward positions that I can't get in, like when I fielded the ball. I fielded almost everything backhand because I couldn't turn my palm all the way around." But Mr. Daley can tell you today at the age of 91 that he didn't feel handicapped one bit and says he didn't let it bother him growing up, living this way his whole life. He adjusted and moved on. Case in point, at times he was used as a 5th infielder and could actually swing a decent bat as a pro, as well as swing a decent golf club on the course, and has a pretty good handicap, no pun intended. He was also able to cast a line or two, and I mean that in a couple of ways. Like most ball players, he liked to go fishing and is able to hurl a line and can hurl many lines put together in the form of speeches. You see, Mr. Daley is a skilled speaker and is successful in the field of public relations. How successful, you ask? Well, one off-season, he made appearances in 72 towns across 6 of our great states. What did he talk about? I don't know. The Daleys moved to Wyoming in 1975. Bud said he no longer followed baseball, saying his region considered it a non-sport, and instead follows the NFL and is a Denver Broncos fan. Mr. Daley has a birthday coming up and will be turning 92. We wish him and his family health and happiness. This only child, who grew up in the 1930s playing in the deserted fields of San Diego, started life a little different than the other kids, but he persevered and became a Major League Baseball player who was a back-to-back MLB All-Star and a 2-time World Series champion, winning one of those in a closeout game while on the mound as a member of the world-famous New York Yankees. He did this in spite of his physical disadvantage that he's dealt with his whole life. Yet Bud Daley will proudly tell you today about the time he sat down Orlando Cepeda, Ernie Banks, and Roberto Clemente in an MLB All-Star game. How many pitchers are around today that can say they did that with 2 good arms? I don't know.